Imagine every move you made was tracked by a device that you voluntarily kept in your pocket. Crazy, right? Now imagine that the companies that were collecting all that data were selling it to the government. Also kind of scary sounding, right? Now imagine that that company was hacked and the hackers leaked all that data to anyone who wanted to download it. Well, all of that is true. Let's dig into it. That's right. I am talking about this massive breach of Gravy Analytics. They are one of these data brokers that have been collecting your location data from hundreds of thousands of different sources and then selling it to the US government. They're just one example of companies in this entire ecosystem. What is this entire ecosystem, you ask? Good question. Found this article by the EFF and I went deep down this rabbit hole. So let's go into it together, okay? So first and foremost, you're gonna say, which of my apps are tracking me and selling it to these companies / the government? Well, it could literally be any app that you give location permission to. So things like your weather app, GPS, coupons, family safety, like track your kids' apps. Those are like common ones that request your location, but I've seen the location permission in games and social media sites, whatever. If you wanted to like tag your location in a social media post, it's going to need your location for that. And then a lot of these are putting it up for sale. What I didn't realize was things like this were happening all the time. This is an email that an app developer could get from a sort of data broker like SafeGraph. They're saying, hey, we can monetize that location data that you're collecting for about $1 to $4 per user of your app. So some developers out there say you made like Flappy Bird 2 and you could share your high score with a location tag. So of course you need the location permission. And say you're not making all that much money on Flappy Bird 2, but you had a good amount of users download it. Say you had like 10,000 users. Someone could come up to you and say, hey, we can give you $40,000 a year, not for your app, not $40,000 as like the revenue of your app, just as like to suck off the exhaust pipe of your app of data that you're already collecting. Well, that's what is underlying a lot of what we're about to get into. Side note, not just required for the apps that have that kind of permission and then sell it directly. The other thing that a lot of apps do is serve ads to you. And in order to do that, they plug into ad networks. The ad tech ecosystem is absolutely insane and constantly iterating on how close they could target the exact right customer that they want to target at the right time, down to the location of that customer. This ad tech ecosystem is a whole other video, but for this purposes, what you need to know is there's something called the bid stream, basically allowing advertisers to bid on your attention and app developers to choose which ads they're serving to which of their users. Your location data is part of that whole ecosystem as well. So it's part of the topic of today's video. So the root of the problem today is this company, Gravy Analytics. They are just one of dozens of companies that just exists off of the side of everything I just talked about of apps and advertising networks collecting and then monetizing data about you. Gravy Analytics is one of the largest in this area, but they're just one of dozens. An obvious question is, which of the apps that are collecting my location data are monetizing it, right? Because that's not something that I saw when I downloaded an app and it said, hey, we need permission for your location. It never said, we need permission for your location. And by the way, we're going to sell that for $4 to Gravy Analytics. That's actually almost impossible to know. It could be any app that has that data, could be monetizing it. It's on the back end. They don't have to tell you. We know about some of these behind the scenes relationships due to investigative reporting, GDPR requests, any sort of things that is like required to give sort of information on request has revealed some of these relationships. But as this article says, just the tip of the iceberg, because some of these companies are out there advertising just how many apps they are collecting data from, which could be over 80,000 just for this Vental company, which is a subsidiary of Gravy Analytics alone. And I think this sums it up nicely. Users have little hope in understanding which of their apps that they have downloaded and have agreed to share information with are selling it to data brokers. And a lot of the developers don't even know where the data that they're collecting even ends up in this whole ecosystem because it's that convoluted. Recapping what we know so far, you probably have a lot of apps you've given permission for your location data. Just comes with using a cell phone these days. Any one of those apps could be selling your data, not just your location data. That's just what we're talking about today. There is very little you can do to avoid this whole ecosystem. Like I said, even if you don't even give the permission to a lot of these apps, if you're getting advertisements via anything on these mobile devices, that whole ad network also knows more about you than you probably realize. And this industry is so unregulated and so convoluted that even the developers that are monetizing that data probably have very little idea of what the end result of the data that they gave away or sold even is. And sometimes the result of that data is imprisonment, death. Maybe the person purchasing that data was a military contractor, deportation, or otherwise just tracking somebody for whatever purposes. All right, let's get back to Gravy Analytics. They and their stated purpose most of the time is around corporation decision making. So could we put a McDonald's on this corner based on driving patterns and spending power and data that we have about income in the area and fast food spending and all of this stuff, okay? That's like the stated purpose for what they're collecting. But they sell it to all sorts of different government agencies who, as you'll see, do not care about the McDonald's on the corner or where the next Starbucks opens up in the neighborhood. So, as we said, Gravy Analytics is one of the largest in this space, and they are collecting data from all of these different sources and then selling it downstream to Department of Homeland Security, DoD, ICE, Secret Service, the FBI, the DEA, etc. It's important to note here, this isn't just US-based data. This is global data. They claim that they have over 150 million devices worth of this kind of information. To get an idea for how much this might cost a particular government agency, we're talking billions of dollars, right? So for a all-you-can-eat license, it looks like this costs about $650,000 per year for each of the customers. Or they have less all-you-can-eat type pricing for numbers of queries, say 12,000 queries for about 20 grand. So on the low end, you're talking millions of dollars, probably tens of millions of dollars. On the high end, you could see how this quickly turns into a multi-billion-dollar industry. A little bit more of a side tangent before we go into this particular hack that we're talking about today. Like I said, Gravy Analytics is one, Babel Street's another. I've covered Babel Street in another video. They are so powerful, they're meant to just be used by law enforcement. But due to some other reporting, it turns out law enforcement's a pretty loose definition. If you get registered as like a PI, they'll just sell you access. They don't even really ask for too much proof about that whole PI thing. So I'm not sure if you even have to do it or if you can just claim that you're a law enforcement and they start giving you access. And that's just the intended uses of the data, which should be bad enough, right? But what about unintended usage? Like if a hacker got their hands on all of this data that was being collected. That would never happen, right? Well, it did. So Gravy Analytics looks like allegedly had been hacked. I don't have a ton of confirmation on this yet, but it looks to be true because if you try to go to gravyanalytics.com, site's offline. So the hackers have claimed to completely have compromised Gravy Analytics. Their servers, their domains, their S3 buckets, everything. And they're selling access to 10 terabytes of this location data. That's a lot of just like text data. So if this is just like longitude, latitude type stuff, that would just be an obscene amount of data. So I think this is fairly enriched data from just literally the file size, if that can be believed. This article by 4 is absolutely great. I'm going to read this quote directly because I think it rings true. A location data broker like Gravy Analytics getting hacked is a nightmare scenario. All privacy advocates have feared and warned about this. The potential harm for individuals is haunting, And if all the bulk location data of Americans ends up being sold on underground markets, this will create countless de-anonymization risks and tracking concerns for high-risk individuals and organizations. This is from Zach Edwards. As you can see here, the hackers have posted about this data leak with a bit of a ransom, giving the company 24 hours to answer, or they're going to start to publish the information. At the time of recording this was published between 12 and 24 hours ago. Like I said about enrichment, it looks like it has longitude, latitude data tied to individual people and devices and what we know about them. And then also things like likely driving were parts of lines that they were sharing in the demo data to prove that this was a true hack. Like 404 mentions, this Babel Street info is part of this leak as well. They had a relationship between these two data brokers. 404 has another article about Babel Street that talks about how it could be used to track visitors to out-of-state abortion clinics. Basically, hey, this phone crossed state lines, visited a known abortion clinic, and then traveled back, and could be used to prosecute those individuals. Covering two more points about the EFF article. Is this legal? In short, no, we don't think so, right? There are no warrants involved in the purchasing of this data. In general, as part of an investigation, if the federal government wants location data about a specific person, of course it should get a warrant. This is what happens when you collect information on this broad scale like this. This is sweeping information gathering. This isn't targeted, right? When we talk about like the telecom industry getting hacked by China and then monitoring a whole bunch of phone calls and texts, we talk about it in shock and horror. But then when we do this kind of thing to ourselves, that's just like normal operating procedure and in the name of safety or something like that. So this EFF article came out 2 years ago, and what they called about 3 years ago, it's 2025. And what they said needs to happen is that Congress must put a federal ban on purchase of this kinds of sensitive information. This seems like a pretty straightforward issue. Government agencies should not be able to buy any personal data that would normally require a warrant. I'd have to agree, because like I said, even if the intended purpose of the data collection was to like play Starbucks or whatever the hell, or the data purchased by the government for legitimate investigative purposes, it doesn't matter because they couldn't properly protect the data. So the intended purpose goes out the window. Now look who might be leaking the data in the next 24 hours if this ransom isn't paid, and probably even if the ransom is paid. I'm going to do a bit more of a deeper dive into this whole ad tech and bidding ecosystem and location trading, because I find that stuff super fascinating. I also find it a shame that like our world's best and brightest are currently working for basically mega advertising companies at this point and are working their hardest to get like the most clicks out of you down to the nanosecond, because that moved the needle 0.05% in the right direction or whatever it is. We have like top engineers working to optimize the whole advertising ecosystem in this way that is absolutely shredding any semblance of privacy that we all have. There are some extreme measures that you could take to protect yourself against a lot of the stuff that I talked about in today's video. But honestly, it involves really removing yourself from a lot of modern technological society. And I don't find a lot of that suggestions are really user-friendly whatsoever. If you want to like be able to text your family via iMessage, you're going to want to text them via iMessage. And a lot of the things that I would say would be to use devices that don't have a lot of these location data, look up something like Graphene OS, all this kind of stuff. But you're going to start ripping out more and more functionality and isolating yourself from this whole ecosystem. These are trade-offs that I don't know a whole lot of people are willing to make. So I suggest what EFF is suggesting. We need some from the top legislation here, not for this burden to be on you to figure out how to avoid who is selling data that they're collecting about you that you didn't even realize they were collecting about you. Thanks for watching. Follow up more cybersecurity news. Hey, don't forget volnew.com. Sign up for my newsletter, free every week, and we're writing original news stories. We covered this one as well after the 404 article, but I wrote some of my thoughts down at the bottom here, Matt's Raw Thoughts. Please go check it out, subscribe. It really helps more than I can possibly tell you.